So I decided to conjure up some content for this week's Wowhead Weekly News Review. And today we actually have a ton to talk about. Hopefully this video doesn't run too long, but yeah, we have a lot. So basically, War Within Alpha has dropped. There's a playable version. There's actually a decent amount of interviews and content surrounding that. We're going to kind of cover the most important stuff that I've seen. There's a lot of other stuff on Wowhead as well that you can check out to kind of, find out where, like, what is changing. You can see a bunch of different mogs and stuff like that, dynamic flying mounts and stuff like that we're going to not necessarily have enough time to cover, but we're going to try to cover everything. On top of that, there were some interviews that I've kind of gotten together and culminated into one thing. There's also some data mining that's kind of important where, the Mythic Plus season dungeons got announced, and that was very controversial. And then on top of all of that, there's Season 4 patch notes for the next live season that's coming next week. So we actually have a lot to cover. So without further ado, let's talk about the alpha development notes. Basically, what's available on the alpha right now is all the classes are available. Almost all of them have at least one hero talent available for play. I think the exception of that is like Assassination Rogue and like Enhancement Shaman or something like that. So most classes have hero talents available. There were some classes that got pretty extensive, changes or reworks or whatever, and then if you saw the most recent video that we put up on the Wowhead YouTube channel, that was basically me going through with all the guide writers that had major changes for the class and kind of talking about them, right? So like we had Volk talk about, Preservation Evoker and Resto Druid. We had June talk about Mistweaver. We had Jack talk about Disc and Holy Priest and some of the new hero talents as well. Because we also had 6 new hero talents that dropped, and those were Sentinel Hunter, Sun Fury Mage, Master of Harmony Monk, Oracle Priest, Void Weaver Priest, and Soul Harvester Warlock. So we were privileged to be able to, have conversations with all the class writers about what's changing with their classes in the alpha. And that's actually the biggest stuff. Beyond that, what's available in the alpha is you can level in one zone from 70 to 72. So it's just generic questing. Dynamic flying is available for mounts that were previously dragon riding, but now up to like 500 new mounts have the ability to be able to dragon ride. On top of that, there are 2 dungeons that are available in Cinderbrew Meadery and the Rookery. I think that Cinderbrew Meadery is aesthetically one of my favorite dungeons I've ever seen. I think that dungeon is so cool. I hope it ends up playing well in Mythic Plus, because obviously I really care about that a lot. But I think in regards to what's actually going on with that dungeon, like how it is aesthetically, I think that dungeon owns. And then on top of that, there's the new expansion feature, which are delves. Some people have compared it to Torghast. I think that's very bad. I think that the way I would compare it to is Visions of N'Zoth or like Wither Army Training. I think that those are probably the 2 closest equivalents, where what you do is you go into a dungeon. You can watch gameplay of this. You can go into a dungeon, and there are specific tiers of this. So it goes from 0 to 11, and there are 13 delves. Right now, there's only 3 available for testing, and right now you only have tiers 1 and 2 because those are the leveling tiers. But as you go up higher tiers, the delves just get harder. On top of that, there's companions that you bring into the delves with you. I think you can do it as a multiplayer scenario as well. But there are companions that you bring into the delves with you, and whenever you bring these companions into the delves, they do different things. Right now you have like Brand Bronzebeard, and he's either a healer or a DPS, right? And he does a little bit of damage or does a little bit of healing. I think that the big success point for delves would be if it's actually like challenging. I think there's kind of an absence of challenging single player content in World of Warcraft, generally speaking. Obviously there's a lot of challenging group content, but I typically think that once an expansion, having challenging single player content would be nice. Torghast maybe was that for some people, but I think that there was a lot of garbage, is how I describe it, surrounding Torghast that ended up impeding it being able to be good hard single player content. I think also the good part maybe was a little bit lacking. Let's talk about some of the other stuff that we've seen this week. Season 1 dungeon rotation got data mined over here at Wowhead. The 4, I don't really have any comments to say about the 4 War Within dungeons. Haven't seen them, don't know anything about them, haven't even tested them in Mythic Plus, so I have no comments. However, the 4 returning dungeon are Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, the Necrotic Wake, Siege of Borealis, and Grim Batol. And this is definitely a dungeon pool that they could have picked, is what I will say. Mist of Tyrannosaith, pretty popular dungeon in Shadowlands. Both it and Necrotic Wake have some questions as to what's going to happen with the Covenant-specific buffs. I kind of suspect that they're just going to be disabled, or like, you're going to be able to just like click the nut and get the checkpoint, or you're just going to be able to walk up and click the mushrooms. Something like that seems likely to happen. Alternatively, the mushrooms could be gone. The nut could be just like a standardized checkpoint. The golems in Necrotic Wake could be completely gone. Mist of Tyrannosaith, though, not the worst dungeon I've ever seen. Pretty decent dungeon. Necrotic Wake and Siege of Borealis, though, I don't know if I could have picked worse dungeons. Now, Blizzard has the opportunity to be able to rework these into being a lot better. So I don't want to really like trash on Blizzard's decision immediately. These are not the dungeons I would have picked, though, in terms of like extensive, like the fact that they need extensive changes. So Siege of Borealis, they have a lot of issues with bosses in that dungeon being timer based, and a lot of the stuff does not scale very well with Tyrannical, is frankly what I would say about that dungeon. On top of that, there is the Ashvane Spotter shenanigans, where you would bombard every single mob in that key with the Ashvane Spotter, and that didn't feel very good. And for similar reasons, Necrotic Wake didn't feel very good, because most of your damage in that dungeon didn't come from you. It instead came from the Javelin. It came from the Anima Orb. It came from the Throw Cleaver ability in the top of the Necropolis as well. And so, it's pretty well documented that players aren't huge into dungeons that, mobs in the dungeon or mechanics in the dungeon do damage to the dungeon itself. Look at like Neltharus, for example. It was not very well liked because the chains did 50% of your damage in the dungeon. But yeah, I think Necrotic Wake and Siege of Borealis, they can be reworked to be better. I think that in their current state, these weren't very fun. Probably some of the least fun I've ever had doing Mythic Plus dungeons was in those dungeons. I thought those dungeons were very bad. But, it can be improved. So, we'll see. I think it's where we land here. Hopefully they get better. And for Grim Batol's a Cataclysm dungeon. So Blizzard's going to have to actually rework the dungeons, and they've proven that they're willing to do that. It happened with Throne of the Tides. It happened with Vortex Pinnacle. They modernized some such as Everbloom, Temple of the Jade Serpent as well. So, could Grim Batol turn into Everbloom levels of good? Hopefully. Hopefully it doesn't turn into Vortex Pinnacle or Temple of the Jade Serpent. But yeah, no, I think Grim Batol, they talk about it in one of the interviews. Tally has an interview, and they talk about modernizing dungeons. They talk about, bringing in some... hold on, let's see. Grim Batol. Yeah, so Grim Batol's coming back. We thought it was a pretty cool setting for us, and we're going to visit some dwarves and taking all the lessons that we learned from Dragonflight 2 with these revamps. And we want to keep the spirit of it. There will be a bombing run, which is, there's like I would say, vehicle combat portion of it. There'll be a bombing run, but we'll make sure to touch it up for modern pacing considerations and balance. They removed the jellyfish 1 minute elevator ride from Throne of the Tides. I think it makes sense for them to be looking to rework Grim Batol's bombing run to be something that's, more modern. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the interviews and things that have happened in the interviews that has been said. First and foremost, affixes in this Tally interview. Andrew D'Souza says, basically they're staying kind of in their current form. We like the friction that they pose as you go up in key levels. It's something that the team talks about a lot, how to address going forward. There's nothing concrete to share with us today, but they're always experimenting. They made big changes in Dragonflight Season 2, and in Season 4, we pushed the last bucket of affixes deeper into the pool. So we're looking to put the right place and put that kind of challenge and the right ways into the players as we go forward. The main goals are going to be the ability to present an extra challenge as you go up in the key levels and places for week over week change. And then lastly, the goal that we're always striving towards is an opportunity for your class to shine on some weeks. So I will say that they've made this sentiment of we want you to be playing the dungeons, not the affixes. And there's, kind of a discrepancy in the community as to where that line is drawn. For Blizzard, they're always going to have to be these kind of people. They're going to have to be the parent that goes, no, you cannot have ice cream for dinner. We have to add friction into the keys. I get it. I think the question in the more community feedback should be where's that line supposed to be drawn, right? For affixes. Because I think that what they're talking about, what their goals are, yeah, we want you to present you with an extra challenge. We want you to have an opportunity for your class to shine week in and week out. We want the pace to change week over week. I think that those are all virtuous. I think that a lot of people don't agree that the current way that affixes work is the best. But as a whole, is what it is. Are there any new Mythic Plus affixes or remaining seasonal affixes? We don't have plans for seasonal affixes. As for new features, basically the Season 4 Dungeon Squish feature and making sure that M0 is going to be modernized every single season is what they're kind of excited for. They have no new affix stuff to really announce. I do agree, though, that I think that the standardization of M0s and making sure that M0s are the exact same dungeons that are present in the dungeon pool every single season is going to really allow players to get a lot more active in Mythic Plus, and I think that's awesome. Raid buffs, nothing's changing with raid buffs. It's something we've talked about, but as of right now, no current plans, no. I think that raid buffs do a good job of giving representation to classes and making sure that your raid comp isn't, just 10 of the same class or something ridiculous with class stacking. But I think that they could maybe cut the raid buff number in half and then have, 2 classes have the same raid buff. That would maybe be better. I think that would be more successful at least. But basically they say they have no current plans. Augmentation, we consider augmentation a success. There's a ton of players who really enjoy the playstyle. We did want to mention that there's some categories of improvement that we can make in regards to logging, and we're tracking and planning on addressing this for War Within launch. I think that Augmentation and support specs actually have an interesting place in the game. Augmentation Evoker is very poorly balanced, and I wouldn't hate seeing a rework as to how it supports your group, particularly in 5-man content. I don't think it works that great, but I will say that I think that Augmentation Evoker and support specs definitely have a place in the game, so I think that makes sense. Difficult raid bosses, I don't think this is necessarily something that we need to cover. They say that it's something that we view as a severe issue. Another big piece of news coming out of the alpha is that Heroic Week was returning. This was announced in an interview. Basically, what the end part is the most important part. It says, then we'll have a period where we actually have access to the M0 system without the season having gone live, and then the season will start, and then you'll have your Heroic Week, and then you'll have the rest of the content unlocked. Heroic Week was something that it broke up. Basically, for those who don't know, it broke up the season start and mythic or unlimited access to M+ resources coming out. Now, this was heavily criticized because it created this feeling where you had to heavily grind Mythic Plus to get a lot of gear, especially if you had any ambitions of raiding in any series capacity. The first week you were spending, whatever your allotted raid time was. Even if it was only like 4 hours, you'd spend 4 hours inside the raid, and you'd spend 45 hours doing Mythic Plus. Obviously, that's being hyperbolic, but you would spend a lot of time doing Mythic Plus, and you would only spend 4 hours inside the raid because you need to grind that gear. And if you didn't get that gear, then you were going to be left in the dust. And it kind of left this feeling where raid-only players were kind of finding it difficult to raid log. There was also pretty large power deltas across the entire raid because gearing, I think the gearing system, just ended up being a bit too fast in some aspects. But yeah, Heroic Week returning, definitely better for, I would say, mythic level raiders. That's the people that it really impacts the best. The downsides is that, assuming that it's going to go back to how it was before, M+ players don't really have anything to do that first week. So, PvPers start the new PvP season. Raiders have this new raid that they can go do on Heroic. Mythic Plusers have the new dungeons that they can do, and they get rewards up until +3. All right, well, that kind of feels bad. I don't know. We'll see, though. Hopefully they make M+ feel a bit more rewarding. Maybe it'll just end up being bad for a week. You never really know. So that was all the stuff that we kind of learned from the alpha. There's also been a bunch of other stuff, such as appearances. We have a lot of the transmogs for Season 1 data mined. We got the Druid one right here. I think Druids are sick. You should play a Druid as well. I don't think this Mog is very sick, though. I don't know. Maybe if I was a Feral, I would enjoy this. I don't know, as a Moonkin, not super huge into it. I think the Rogue one is by far the coolest. This thing is awesome. Anyways, last thing to cover today, Season 4 patch notes. Boolean acquisition and raid rotation. Let's talk about what's going on. So Blizzard has already walked back part of this blue post. So basically, they said every 2 weeks during Dragonflight Season 4, 1 of 3 Dragonflight raids will become awakened. Vault of the Incarnates, Avarice, or Emirjasil. And then they walked this back. I wish I had the post. But basically, they said that instead of it actually being on a 2-week rotation, having discussions with people, they've moved it to a 1-week rotation. So I would say that a 1-week rotation is pretty difficult, assuming that the content is non-trivial. So if the content is trivial, and this is, I would compare this to something like Season of Discovery. Whenever the raid content isn't hard, it allows you to kind of get into Awakened and really not have too many challenges, and it's kind of fun, right? Whenever the content's non-trivial. Whenever you actually have to try super hard for a quote-unquote for fun season, then it becomes a lot less fun. And this is especially true if it's also on a 1-week, cycle where there's literally we're going to go back to Vault of the Incarnates. We have to do the polarization perfectly on Razgeth, otherwise we wipe. And if we don't do it perfectly, we're done for. And then you end up spending, you have to farm Vault of the Incarnates, and it takes you 2 or 3 days, and that feels awful to have to, I would say reprog, a raid. And then next week, we're back to Avarice, right? And now we have to reprog Neltharion bombs. And so that, I think that the 2-week cadence would have made a lot more sense. I think in general, though, last time we saw Faded and now it's Awakened raids, I think they were just too hard. I think that Blizzard could really just go a long ways by just making this pretty easy, especially at heroic and mythic levels, to just let people get into the content, right? There's no reason to gatekeep it by being difficult. It could be pretty easy, and it could still be fun. Additionally, for players who are trying to come back to the game, a buff that increases reputation gained with the Dragonflight reputations will be enabled when a specific raid is awakened. I need to make sure that I go and do the Tuskar and the Community Feast whenever Vault of the Incarnates is awakened. I still need the punching bags and the fish head. So I got to make sure that I go do that. But for Vault of the Incarnates, it's Dragonspell Expedition, Maruk Centaur, and Tuskar. For Avarice, it's, the Lone Niffin, Sibelian, Rathian. For Emirjasil, it's the Dream Wardens, the Valdrakita Court, right? It makes sense. They're just trying to get people their reputation gains, to get max renown and stuff like that on their characters if they haven't been necessarily engaging in the game a ton, but then they come back right before the expansion launches. They want them to be able to juice their rep. Additionally, the tier is going to be what players voted on, so it might be different than Season 3 for you. It might be the same as Season 3 for you. On top of that, there are bronze booleans, which are dinar equivalents, if you remember these. With the cap rising by 1 this week, you'll be able to get 1 boolean, and then you'll be able to catch up to weekly max. And you'll end up exchanging 2 booleans for weapons and powerful cantrip items from the Dragonflight raids. So basically, you're able to buy weapons, you're able to buy, Diurna Ring, very rare items, any trinket. Those are the kind of things that you're able to buy with the booleans. You're not able to buy, tier pieces and stuff like that. There's also cosmetics. We're also selling Jigglesworth Senior as a mount for 3 booleans. So you can buy stuff with that. How it works is it actually is on a track on its own, and the track is 0 out of 12, and you buy it at I don't even know, 502 or something like that, and then you're able to upgrade it all the way up to 528. So you're able to buy those booleans, and it's a little bit different than how it was in the past. Now you're just basically using aspect crests, and you're using your crests to be able to upgrade them, as opposed to having to actually go into the raid on Mythic or whatever, and get currency to upgrade it. Instead, it's just kind of being tied into the current upgrade system, which I think is good. And I think that being able to get 1 boolean per week owns. I think that this is all in all a great system. Deterministic loot for a for fun season should be cool. It will allow some classes to get specific stuff. You're going to get legendary items. You're going to be able to upgrade your legendary weapon as well if you're playing if you're wielding Fearlath or something like that. You're going to be able to upgrade that. Use that weapon. That'd be cool. There's also some rewards. Basically, there's a Voyaging Waterling Dynamic Flying Mount. There's an Awakened Hero for doing the raids on Awakened difficulty. You're going to get portals to the raids, which I don't know why you'd ever want a portal to Avarice or portal to Vault of the Incarnates ever again. But if you complete all the raids on Mythic difficulty, you get the portals. For M+, it's all the Dragonflight dungeons. This is pretty well known. There's obviously, it's just a new Mythic Plus season. No affix changes, no seasonal affix, nothing like that. It's just the dungeons that are changing. PvP kind of similar, it's just a new PvP season. Beyond that, I would say the biggest change is probably the change to the dungeon system as a whole, where how do I even describe this? M0 and Mythic Plus are getting squished. So now, previously, what was Mythic 0 through or Mythic 2 through 10 is getting squished into the M0 difficulty. M0s are now going to be a mainstay part of the content landscape, where they're going to ideally not have the numbers go from 2 to 30. That's ideal. But instead, they're going to go from 2 to 20 is probably optimal for a system like this. And then there's going to be a large portion of the player base that is able to M0s. It's going to be non-timed content, and it's going to offer, I believe it's champion track gear even. So it's going to be like real gear. And then you're able to get hero track gear at +6 or +7. I don't remember exactly the number what it was, but I believe it's +7. And so then you're able to get hero track gear at +7. This creates a smaller gap between somebody who's doing an M0, and it also makes the M0 experience a lot more relevant across the entire expansion. That was basically it. There's been some class tuning. It was only nerfing healers. There's no other class tuning, which is, some people were not very happy about that. Which makes sense. But yeah, that's it. That's basically all the news that we have in regards to Alpha, in regards to Season 4, in regards to this week in World of Warcraft. It was a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.